is a fitting end to the public forum, and we will now go on to the more formal part of the meeting. There are no apologies. I will move from the chair that the agenda be confirmed with the withdrawal of the Freedom Camping Act item.
Could I just have the items left on as... Sorry, I'm being tutored here and how to ask this. To basically, I want to put a motion forward to go with that. I've drawn to set up a consultancy advocacy group for community boards to be included in. How do I ask now?
Just in terms of process, I'm not sure.
Send it.
Leave the item on, but take the report, withdraw the report, but leave the item to be discussed so that a motion can be brought.
I just need some guidance here on the
I've just sent the motion to Jenny.
No. Sandy, can you just give me a bit of advice here? So just to clarify, you want to direct, you want to add some direction to the further development of the report. Yeah. So it's just a matter of how we do the process. That's all. I don't think the intention is out of line, but I just need to make sure that we do it properly.
Would a notice of motion not be formally required for something?
Well, that's really what I'm endeavouring to ascertain.
So I'll just withdraw that and we'll deal with it in the committee.
So I'm moving that the agenda be confirmed with the withdrawal of item, whichever one it was, of the Freedom Camping agenda item anyway. Second, Councillor Staines. 14, yeah. Second, Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Declaration of interest. And my iPad's gone down. I'll move from the chair that we...
Mr Chairman? Sorry, there's an amendment which to mine, which the GSO's got yesterday, which will be incorporated in due course, just acknowledging my membership of the New Zealand Labour Party and associated management procedures.
Thank you. Right. So that I'll move from the chair in that case that we amend the elected members' interest register as indicated, and we confirm the proposed management plan or amend if necessary for the elected members' interest. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, confirmation of minutes. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of the 1st of May 2017 be confirmed as a correct record. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the minutes of the subcommittees. The Bylaws Subcommittee, 14th of March. Councillor Wiley.
Your Worship, the Council approves the minutes of the Bylaws Subcommittee meeting held on the 14th of March 2017.
Seconded. Councillor Lord. Any discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the minutes of the community boards. Mosgiel Tidy Community Board. Councillor Wilson. Oh, sorry. Councillor Wiley, I think, do.
Your Worship, I would like to move them all.
Oh, right. So this is the Mosgiel Tidy, Otago Peninsula, Saddle Hill Community Board, Strath Tidy and Waikoiti. 8 to 12. Seconded Councillor Lord. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. I always forget that little process technique. So, on to the reports. The Reserves and Beaches Bylaw, item 13. Yep. Welcome, Jenny. Welcome, Tom. Now, do you want to introduce this, or do you wish to go straight into questions?
Short introduction.
Yep, that's good. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. The previous reserves bylaw did not include specifically beaches and it did not address drones or dogs on beaches. Council over the years received numerous reports and complaints from users on reserves and beaches around these issues. Staff have worked to streamline and reformat the bylaw to create a more easy, understood, but also a more comprehensive reserves and beaches bylaw. Additions have been made to the context of the bylaw so that it's clear where restrictions are applied. The main changes have been to the layout of the bylaw and the streamlining of the content provided, with some additions and provisions around issues such as vehicles on beaches, dogs and drones on reserves. The key driver of this bylaw and the pending education and implementation plan is not to focus on restricting activities, but providing users with the knowledge of what's permitted and what can be expected when out enjoying our reserves and beaches.
Thank you, Jenny. Now, open up the questions. Councillor Vance.
A careful reading of the report seems to suggest that our horses are going to have much more limited access to most beaches than they have in the past. How many complaints have you had? You've mentioned cars and dogs and something else, I forget what. Wondering how, drones, yeah. How many complaints have you actually had about horses, and could you enlarge on what sort of complaints you've had?
I don't have exact numbers to hand on the number of complaints specifically towards horses. I think one of the key things with the way the bylaw is now, we've identified some areas that through consultation and through hearings are adequate and appropriate for horses to access. If horses wish to access through areas that aren't identified, there is still permission that can be sought.
When you say there's permission that can be sought, can you clarify how that would work? Would someone who wants to, say, take a horse along Smails Beach, would they have to apply to the council first?
Yes, that's what they would do. Similar to drones that are over the 1.5 weight, it would be a permit type process where they would seek permission. That would allow staff to ensure that there wasn't other activities that were occurring at that time that could cause conflict between users.
Right. Now, you mentioned at the outset that the idea of this, of the changes in this report were not to restrict activities along the beaches, and yet it seems to me that in the case of horses in particular, that activity is severely restricted in a lot of areas, application to council being a fairly major barrier. You haven't been able to give us any numbers of the complaints about horses. Can you give us any idea of what sort of horse complaints you might have had?
I'll answer that. I'm the author of the report. There was limited complaints about defecation, but hardly anything else. And we thought that was pretty benign, considering.
So you had some horse poo problems, but you didn't have any problems with people being intimidated by the horses or any other such thing. So it was basically just a droppings issue.
No, so whilst the staff can't give you actual numbers around the complaints about horses, it's actually about managing conflict and uses of the reserves. It's about looking at the reserves and the beaches in the round, looking at ecologically sensitive areas, looking at access points and looking at how they're working with other users of the beaches. So rather than looking at problems horses create in and of themselves, it's about looking at the management of the reserve in its entirety.
That doesn't seem to be a kind of answer that any horse owner would take any comfort in, especially since the only identifiable issue would seem to be horse droppings, which, given all the animals that you find on the beach, I suggest might be the most benign.
Well, clearly, the conflict involves other people. That's the point. It's not just horse owners. If the issue is potential conflict, it's not just horse owners. But look, I note that this, the recommendation is that we accept the subcommittee's recommended decision. So can I invite the chair of the subcommittee, Councillor Wiley, since effectively this comes from the subcommittee, not from staff. So you don't have to answer this, Councillor Wiley, but I'm just leaving you the opportunity to address it, or any of the questions for that matter, given that it's your subcommittee's recommendations that we're discussing.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually think Ms Stokes summed it up quite well. We had a number of issues around the horses and the beaches, and there's a lot of conflict that happens on the beaches. And I think she ticked all the boxes in that area. I think that the report is actually really details some improvements for horse riders, for people using horses on the beaches. So I'm comfortable with that.
Could you just enlarge on the number of conflicts? Because all we've had so far is horse droppings and potential conflicts. Could you give us any other conflicts which have been complained about?
Through the hearing process, we heard from, as you can see, numerous people that came to talk to us, and many of them articulated issues that they'd had. And that could, and part of as you'll see, a big part of it is actually allowing them access to get onto the beach. There's some issues with dogs at times, motorised vehicles, and again, as you read the report, you can actually get a very clear picture of what the issues are.
So are you suggesting that it's the associated vehicles taking the horses to the beaches and the associated dogs that have been the problem? I mean, you keep talking about these other horse issues, and I haven't heard one yet.
I think what was meant was that the vehicles and the dogs gave the horses a problem. Yes. That's the point. This is designed to protect the use by horses. Councillor Benson-Popen and Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Your Worship. Would it be fair to state that a lot of misinformation, an amount of misinformation around what the focus of this bylaw discussion was generated by the way it was publicised, no criticism of any individual or publication, which led horse owners to believe that they would be unable to exercise their horses on the beach, an area largely not controlled by the DCC.
So I think there was some misinformation that came through quite clearly in the hearings, and I think that was a good opportunity for some clarification to be given to horse owners. This bylaw is only up to the mean high water spring tide. I think I've got that right. So that is only where council's jurisdiction is.
Thank you. And would it be accurate to state further that because of those jurisdictional issues, the bylaw in respect of horses and other entry onto that area focused on specific designated entry points to reduce conflict and to clarify the matter for all users?
Very much.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you both for the considerable amount of work, and Ashley, that's gone into the review of this, and it's good to see the matter of vehicles being addressed. But I just wondered if you would like to comment on the comments made in the public forum by Ms Tate around Warrington Beach.
The ecologically sensitive sites we sought significant advice from the Department of Conservation on those. Given that the dog bylaw already restricts dogs from that Warrington area, it wasn't identified to have the same ecological significance as the other sites identified in the bylaw and in the maps in front of you.
Councillor Wilson.
That partly answers the question I was going to pose, which is about the East Otago Tuapari area, management area, which is an MPI designation, I think, to Ngā Tahu, which is, it sort of doesn't sit well with local government. I appreciate that, but I presume that that isn't recognised, because it doesn't sit well with the Local Government Act. That wasn't part of the consultation process, because I understand it's a very important area of their concern. Yeah.
Sorry. So that the East Otago Taipuri area sits below the mean high water spring. Generally,
Okay.
it's a food gathering area below mean high water spring. So that, I guess, that answers our jurisdiction sits at that boundary line.
Councillor O'Malley.
It's just a question around Schedule 2 and the albatross colony. That's not the whole of Taiaroa Head and Pilot's Beach. I wondered, should you just change that to Taiaroa Head, including Pilot's Beach? Or is it only supposed to be the albatross colony? Page 118.
Did you say 118? 118.
I'll answer that. The area is clearly defined in the map. So, yeah.
So the little blue penguin colony at Pilot's Beach is not to be included as an ecologically sensitive area? It's under the Kukura. Well, that's, yeah, but so is the albatross colony under a mixed ownership model as well, so that wouldn't be necessarily an objection to reduce one and not the other.
We've taken advice from the Department of Conservation on that.
Okay.
Yep.
So it is just the albatross colony?
Just what's stated in there on the maps.
Okay.
Further questions? Councillor Benson.
And my third, would it be accurate to say, question is that the concerns that have been communicated today to councillors by email from Mr Wilson, and an email which was sent at 12:58, I think, were traversed in terms of process and substance by the hearings committee and not found to be valid.
Yes.
You get the Councillor Bezet Memorial Prize, Councillor Benson Pope.
Well, Councillor Bezet's no longer here, so...
Any further questions? Righto. Councillor Wiley has moved. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? You're moving the recommendations, Councillor Wiley. Seconder, Councillor Staines.
Excuse me. We've just noticed in the a response to Councillor O'Malley's question that actually the map for Taiaroa Head is actually missing from the bundle of documents. Can we just have a brief moment to correct that?
Okay, I'll move from the chair that we adjourn for 10 minutes. Seconded, Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Okay, we'll get underway again, councillors. I understand the map is on its way, and that in conjunction with the map there will be an amendment to the recommendation, the resolutions. But anyway, we'll get to that. So we'll continue with questions. Are there any further questions? Right. So, Jenny, if you could put up the amended recommendation, please. Is there a further amendment, Jenny?
Yeah,
Right. Okay, bear with us. Bear with. Okay. So can you just tell me what's being added, which?
Choose the proposed bylaw A is the most appropriate form of bylaw and B does not.
Right. So just for councillors' information, the additional piece that Jenny's just tidying up on the screen is the bit that says determines, and the council determines that the proposed bylaw is the most appropriate bylaw and does not give rise to any implications under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, which I assume is required to be affirmed. So would someone like to move that? It's been suggested that it would be clearer to councillors if we waited until we had further information to clarify this completely. So I'm going to propose that we move on to the next item, which is item 15, part-time belt access way 25 Ross Street. So on to item 15, councillors.
Your Worship.
Thank you. Right, we're on to item 15. Do you want to introduce this, Jenny? Or questions on item 15, please? Councillor Wilson. You're having to move? Yep. Second to Councillor O'Malley. Do you wish to speak to it? Is there any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yes. Carried. Item 16, part-town belt Queen's Drive to Waller Street, very similar. Moved Councillor Hawkins, seconded Councillor Newell. Do anyone wish to speak to this? There's no one. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yes. Carried. Right, we'll move on to item 17 in that case. Long-term plan, I'm sorry, Julie and Tom. Just take a seat in my... Sorry? All right. Okay, Sandy, welcome. Do you wish to introduce this?
I'm happy to take questions.
Right, question now. We're on to item 17, colleagues. Long-term plan 2018. We'll do questions for a start. So, questions. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. My question is around the headline, I forget what the terminology is, headline indicators around the strategic framework that's included in here, where one or usually two things have been picked out from each of the council strategies to focus on, which is, the question is what the process was for choosing which of those things are there and which aren't, and I don't want to get into a conversation around editing that in this instance, but if we don't do it at this forum, will we have an opportunity to feed in potentially alternative headline indicators?
Yes, so these were just examples of what the indicators might be, but there will be an opportunity for councillors to provide input into what the final version of those will be.
At what point would we anticipate that to... Sorry, are you stalling for time?
I am stalling for time and now the team have arrived.
Tell Jim. Sorry.
Oh, no. So, one memento, and I will just update my colleague on the question. I'm still well enough now that the person I really need is here. So, Maria said we need to ask Tammy, and so here's Tammy. So, let me just get another chair. And Tammy will explain to you exactly when you can feed back into what those headline indicators might be.
Would that help?
Yeah.
I don't know where you, sorry, we've come in late, apologies for that, but I'm not sure where you've got to in terms of the discussion about indicators. We've done our best sort of go at bringing together what was in all of the individual strategies and putting in some indicators for strategies where there were no indicators, so that's the spatial plan and the Three Waters strategy. If there are issues with those strategic sort of high-level outcome indicators, you know, our intent is to have a couple of very high-level indicators that the community can easily track progress on our strategic objectives. So that's our best attempt at that. If you've got feedback on those, we can definitely take it and do something further with it. Our whole goal in sort of expediting the process of the long-term plan, so you're seeing things at this meeting today that you would usually only get in December for the January meetings. So our whole purpose is to give you more time to think things through and give you more time to input and for the community to input. We'd obviously like to get these sort of decided upon sooner rather than later because they do influence sort of other steps in the process, but that's all right.
Okay, so the question from Councillor Hawkins was around when, is that right? When we would have input to those, to adjusting those indicators, if that was.
Well, we did do a briefing with you earlier, and now we're presenting them to you formally through this report.
But the question is, Ms Graham answered Councillor Hawkins' first question by saying, yes, you will have opportunity for input, and the next question was, what's the timing for that? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, we can try that.
Through your worship, thank you. Yes, we can schedule in another councillor workshop to discuss the indicators in detail. I would suggest to help progress other pieces of work that the council may want to consider whether they just adopt the proposed statements for community outcomes. So we can progress other work and we can have a more discussion around the indicators around the community outcome measurement.
Thank you, and apologies if I've missed earlier opportunities to be part of this process, and I don't want to suggest that at a wholesale level I have any great concern. There are just a couple of particular ones. I just didn't know if it was going to be necessarily that constructive to try and rewrite them by committee in this forum. And so for staff's information, I suppose, I just had, there's a conversation, I think it's worth a conversation around the GDP metric under economic development. But my biggest concern really is under social wellbeing. Neither of those two indicators are around housing, which is a key part of our social wellbeing strategy. And I don't know what that indicator might be, but if just to flag that if that was something that people could have a think about what that might look like, that would be helpful to me. Thank you.
You wonder if they agree with that?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Any further questions? Councillor Staines, I believe you're the next one.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question concerns the projected growth in population in the assumptions. And today we heard that in the last 12 months we've had a population increase of about 900 people.
944.
944. And that rough maths is around 0.7%, and we're working on a 0.2%. Now, this might just, like I know we've had had Syrian refugees arrive, so there has been some special cause. But do we need to review the figure for our assumption from 0.2%?
I think it would be the safest way to look at it is that these are long-term projections, and sometimes they're more or less accurate depending on what happens in sort of globally and nationally and locally. I wouldn't recommend that we review them at this point. We're using the Stats NZ projections. It may be that you want to assign a greater level of uncertainty. We have reflected that we think there's a greater level of uncertainty. So in this year's LTP growth significant forecasting assumptions, we're saying low to medium uncertainty, whereas previously we've said low uncertainty about population growth. So you may wish to put a higher level of uncertainty on that assumption.
But the median projection's 0.5%. So for the last year we've been at 0.8. The median projection's 0.5. So it's once we add in that level of uncertainty, that gives us room to move.
Councillor Laufey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to ask, forgive my ignorance about the process. So I understand you had Rationale and ICOM work on the documents. So now that you've come up with this statement, has the work of Rationale and other companies finished, or do you keep on working with them?
We often contract out pieces of work, and Rationale and ACOM both provided expertise in areas that we don't have staff expertise in. So I would imagine that in the future we may still use both those companies.
Right. So I'm referring to page 200 here. And again, like Councillor Hawkins, I don't want to be wordsmithing, but I'm concerned about the not depression or something, but it says Dunedin is growing, but not as fast as other main cities. For me, I don't want to be projecting that out, as part of the discussion. I want to try and be positive as possible. So this is Rationale's work, isn't it?
We've drawn on Rationale's work for that city profile. I mean, the city profile is about an evidence base, so we do it based on the evidence that we have to hand. And I think that's where, if you are unconvinced by that evidence, you have the ability to say whether you think this is more or less uncertain than we're suggesting.
I mean, I think your issue is the framing, because that heading could equally say Dunedin is growing faster than it has for many decades, and that would still be correct. Yes. So the issue is the framing of this, and we'll have a look at that.
Yep, and so that's a really good point, and we can look at positively framing all of those statements.
Yes, please.
Councillor Vandervis.
On page 194, significant forecasting assumptions, number 13 talks about risks and underlying financial estimates. I've had a look through, and there's a lot of pages here and a lot of information, but it all seems pretty generic, and nothing seems to refer to what I would consider to be financial risks. One being the doubling of cycleway costs, and another one being $720 million now intending to be spent by Aurora, which obviously is going to affect our bottom line. So in terms of significant forecasting assumptions, could we have the under budgeting of the projects like cycleways as a risk, and also the projected dividends from Aurora, given that they want to spend $720 million?
We wouldn't have the cycleway costs as a risk, because Council has yet to do their prioritisation of cycleway projects. So like any other CapEx, that is completely within Councillor's control as to whether to include that in the budget or not. I mean, there's been a change in costing, but it's not a risk in the sense that that affects the underlying assumptions for the financial estimates. With regard to the work being done by the CCOs, and in particular Aurora with their upgrade program, we are yet to have a final discussion with you and the DCHL board on the impact of that on future dividends, and there is some risk to future dividend stream. The debt level for Aurora in and of itself doesn't pose a risk to the council. It's not a debt to us. It's a debt to Aurora, and a good chunk of that was already in their forward budget. But there is an impact on their dividends. We just don't know what that is yet, and we will be flagging that. So we certainly could include a statement to say that as yet the debt levels for the CCOs going forward have not been finalised. Would that be? Yep. So we'll do that. The dividend
Isn't
levels.
it true that we are, at the end of the day, fundamentally liable for the debts of our council-controlled companies?
The council-controlled companies have their own debt structure and could be sold in order to offset that debt if that's what you as council choose to do. So the debt level is structured over, and that option has been put in front of councillors in the past, and you haven't chosen that. So the debt that they're intending to borrow over a 10-year period doesn't mean that their debt level will reach that full 720, because they're also proposing debt repayments over that period of time as well. But that whole process in the wash is still in the process of the division of the two CCOs, and we don't know the final outcome of that.
Thank you. A further question which you've just raised, you said that the option of selling Aurora has been put past councillors in the past. I've been here since 2004 and don't recall having had that opportunity.
Yes, Mr Mackenzie put a report up to councillors last year or the year before, which outlined the net return for every single one of the CCOs, and outlined that with the exception of Taieri Gorge Railway, which was pretty even pegging, each of the other CCOs was returning a return to the council that was higher than the cost of the debt that we had because of owning those CCOs. And part of that report was to say, are there any steps you wish us to take? And at that point, nobody raised, we want you to look at selling those. But that report is a matter of public record. You could go back to that, and at any time, councillors can debate the issue of whether you want to continue to owning CCOs. It's a completely voluntary exercise. You're not compelled.
Okay. There are officials in what you've just said, but I realise that this isn't the place to discuss them. I hope to discuss them later. I would be happy if the question mark over the returns long term were added in, given that 720 million over long term will be significant.
It is more the dividend return in the short term, because as you're informed, there's processes that will take care of it in the longer term. But the issue is definitely a short term crunch, so we'll make sure we include that.
I love your optimism. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on Councillor Van der Vis's question? My recall is that we project dividends in our long-term plan budgets. So I take it that what you just said means that they will be reviewed, and as this is developed, those projections will be adjusted, because I seem to recall that we had virtually nil dividends. We added up sort of $500,000 a year from progressively. That will be reviewed, and that will be reflected in the long-term plan that we debate and develop.
Yes, that's correct. We've gone from a high of receiving $23 or $24 million a year in dividend to the current position where we receive nil, but there is an $11 million a year payment that goes towards effectively, most of that goes towards paying off the stadium, and then there's a small payment for the shareholder advance, interest on the shareholder advance. We were planning, when we did the last LTP, that over this next 3 years that dividend from the CCOs would begin to step up again, and we will be reviewing that in the light of the high level of asset maintenance required by Aurora, and what the impact that has for them in terms of servicing that debt. And we'll be coming back to you about what that means with regard to the dividend, but it seems that it would be a fair assumption to assume that it will at the very least be longer until that debt, dividend payment recommences.
Right. Do you accept that the high dividends that we used to get were often largely borrowed anyway, and that the debt was created outside council simply to give us those dividends, and that in addition to that, there is another kind of debt created by the CCOs, and that is deferred maintenance, and that is why we're now looking at $720 million rather than a much smaller figure. Do you accept that debt, deferred maintenance and borrowed money for dividends have actually been misrepresented in the past?
Oh no, I certainly am not in a position to tell you whether or not they've been misrepresented. What I can tell you is that there have been periods of time where the dividend payment to this council has been higher than the profit generated through DCHL would have allowed for them to do, and so debt has been incurred. There has been a concerted effort on our part in the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years, to pay off the debt that remained at DCHL because of that. I anticipate going forward that we will be in a position where there is, if you like, a buffer that is carried by DCHL, and this is the position we have been working towards, which would enable the key position for us in the long term is to have an even dividend flow, because we tend to project our budgets 3, 4, 5, 10 years ahead, and an even dividend flow is pretty important for us. Being told 6 months before, look at our dividend, we're going to have 3 million extra or 3 million less is more problematic. It is better for us if it is even, and so creating a buffer so that DCHL were able to pay an even dividend. Some years you might have to dip into that buffer, and some years you may re-top up that buffer. Getting that buffer does require that debt level, that debt that was created in the big dividend years to be paid off, and that isn't yet paid off. So yes, there was definitely some borrowing to pay dividends. Certainly, absolutely not in recent years, and in fact, we've paid off a chunk of that debt.
Finally, do you accept that in addition to the debt, the bigger issue of deferred maintenance will also ultimately come back to council?
If I understand you correctly, I think the questioning of councillors by DCHL and in the very public position of Aurora and Delta has been that there has been some deferred maintenance in the pole replacement program, or that we were planning a pole replacement program, and that has been brought forward in order to deal with the condition of the poles, and that is well underway, and there is a very public proposal to borrow $720 million over the next 10 years in order to step up their asset maintenance and renewals right across their network. So I think those public positions acknowledge that is correct.
Thank you.
And can I confirm that, as you say, the contention that DCHL borrowed in order to pay dividends was publicly acknowledged 5 years ago when we set about correcting it, and so that is absolutely correct, and we're paying it.
Do you also accept, Your Worship, that DCHL, or certainly Aurora, deferred massive maintenance also in order to pay dividends?
Well, that's been addressed already.
I don't know if they
I'm just
did
confirming that the position you put was publicly confirmed 5 years ago.
Except I don't think you would find that the company's position, I might be wrong, and you would need to ask them, is that they deferred maintenance in order to pay dividends. I mean, if you're actually capable of borrowing to pay dividends, the maintenance in that sense is unrelated to those two things. There was deferred maintenance for a raft of reasons, but I don't think it was so that they could pay dividends. They paid the dividends that we asked for.
Right. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Laufrist.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you were involved in the last LTP process in 2015, but would you have any advice for new councillors, particularly as to the process of engagement with the community, given that you've been through the 2015 process, as to what could be improved? Do you have the staff, say, for example, to evaluate the process once it's over and that we've actually gotten real buy-in from ordinary residents?
Sorry, I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and one of the reasons why we are speeding up the process of getting key chunks delivered, is to support more engagement from the community. I think that's why we want the city profile approved today. We want the growth projections approved, so that we can actually say to the community, this is the scene that you're working within, this is what the context is, so that there is some time to absorb that information and have thoughts within that, because I think otherwise the community has, in the previous LTPs, got all of that information in one chunk and then been given a month to think about it and think about what they want. So I think we have learnt some lessons, and we're working quite hard to move that process along in a different way this time around. And I hear you very strongly on that need not to just engage with the usual suspects, but to actually engage with the whole community.
And can I add to that, Councillor Laffey, so that not only was the community expected to swallow things in large chunks, councillors were as well. So this is it's a very welcome process where we're getting stuff much earlier, and it's allowing us to develop our thinking much earlier too. I think it's really worthwhile. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just one further on the headline indicator question. Is it the intention of the consultation process that we're specifically asking the community whether they think those are the two most important things we should be measuring? So I'm just trying to figure out what role this plays in terms of the ongoing conversation between now and this time next year.
My personal staff advice on that would be that if you ask your community to start getting into things like deciding what the measures should be at that level, it's quite a complicated conversation. I would hope that we've done enough work with the community over the past sort of 5 or 6 years with the development of the strategic framework to know what the community sees as important. And we've done our best, and I understand that you've got you see some challenges with some of it, done our best to reflect that in those indicators. We're really trying to get to the point where people can easily have in their heads what we are tracking on as a city, and see whether we are achieving things.
We just have had a discussion about the resolutions vis-à-vis the conversation today, and would like to suggest that we delete the and headline indicators from A1, because we can progress what we need to do by way of the work programme with the other resolutions considered, and then look at what we do about those headline indicators to cover off some of the concerns and wording changes that councillors would like to make.
Okay, so since we've got to the end of questions, and since we've just had that amendment suggested, would someone like to move Councillor Staines?
That's 2, 3 and 4, which will become 1, 2 and 3.
So this is page 192. This is long-term plan.
Remove the phrase and headline indicators.
So this is in A1. Remove and headline indicators of attachment.
So you've taken out the first
Putting it up now.
under.
Putting it up now.
Sorry, we actually require the outcomes statements to be adopted if
That's right.
possible today, but we can take out the words headline indicators.
Right, so move Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Gary. Councillor Staines, do you wish to speak to this in the first instance? Any other speakers? Right, I'll put it. It's up on the board, and it's just as on the order paper, except for the removal of the second part of A1. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, now are we ready to go back to Reserves and Beaches bylaw? Are we ready to go back to that? Yep.
Yes, we are.
We can go back to item 13, councillors, on page 78. Is there anything changed about? Right, so, yes. So the recommendation is now up on the board, and it includes C and D. Oh, no, so it includes C, D's already there. So it includes the C on the order paper is the new D, and there's a new C inserted. So is everyone having to move? So that's Councillor Wiley and Councillor Staines. Right. Councillor Wiley, as chair of the bylaw subcommittee, do you wish to speak to this now?
Yes, Your Worship. For me, this was a huge learning process because, one, it was my first time chairing a process like this, so I really want to thank Councillor Benson-Pope and Councillor Steadman for assisting me that, and especially the wisdom of Councillor Benson-Pope, which we needed numerous times, so I thank you for that. Staff have, as you can tell, have really put a lot into this and covering the process off as much as we can and as effectively as we can, and I really appreciate the time and energy they put into it. It was a very interesting bylaw, and you sit on these hearings thinking you know what the outcome is going to be and what the discussion's going to be. But I can definitely say I learned more about a lot of things I didn't know than I now know, especially when it comes to things like drones. And the different areas and what you need and what you don't need and flight share and things like that. So it really was quite an in-depth process. The other thing is I want to thank the submitters that came and presented. And unlike what we've seen and may have read in a couple of emails and stuff, there was a lot of engagement. There was a lot of great discussion, presentations made and presented at the hearings. I think the minutes do some of it justice, but there was some really passionate people and compelling arguments that they presented, and it really did give us a full spectrum of this whole process. The other part that I really want to acknowledge is the coastal community boards. The 4 of them were all part of this process and were engaged with, and they really assisted us to bring together what we have in front of us. Obviously, DOC had a role to play, so we appreciate the Department of Conservation in that. But I do believe overall that it's a positive outcome for our community, and one that I'm very happy to move.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I'd like to thank the panel staff, who I think got a curveball at the last minute and had to include the beaches, and that was, I'm really grateful that they took that on board. And the reason I want to speak to this is that the motion had been on our council papers for I think 4 or 5 years to do something about the beaches. I'm thrilled that we've put a line in the sand, so to speak, on that matter. But again, and echoing the words of the chair, to the submitters who came along and actually supported that and gave us the trust that we're doing the right thing. Yes, it will cause some inconvenience potentially to request a permit, but I think Dunedin has for so long said we've got amazing wildlife, but we actually have been in some ways very lucky to have retained that because we haven't necessarily managed it to ensure that success. And I'm really delighted that we've front-footed some of the concerns that have happened elsewhere and added them in and included them. And my trepidation may be that we'll get more wildlife areas that may be generated from the from vehicles not being in some of those areas, and we may have even more assets to showcase to the rest of the world. So delighted with all the work and the outcome, and congratulations to the panel and the staff for making it happen.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I support the bylaw as proposed and the motion. I want to speak briefly to commend one particular outcome of this process, and that's around the restriction of vehicles on beaches. This is something that's been raised time and time again with us, particularly by residents in the Tomahawk community, and I thank them for their patience in us getting to a point where we've been able to discuss it and come to this resolution. There's been a reluctance politically to do anything about it, I think, for fear of a public backlash for restricting vehicles doing anything. So I commend staff for their bravery in including it in the draft proposal. Those fears, it turns out, are unfounded. A notable absence, both in political outrage, public outrage, or even submissions against it as a proposal through this bylaw review process. There are two of the key functions of regulation are to protect people from others, and sadly the need to protect them from themselves. And I hope these changes will relieve the anxiety of beach users who have faced an increasing number of vehicles on their beach, but also reduce the drawdown on both community and public resources as we increasingly have had to rescue stranded drivers, perhaps a little more ambitious than the title charts or their driving capacity would have suggested they ought to have been. So hopefully that will resolve itself through this very sensible outcome through this process, and I commend, again, echoing earlier comments, all staff and panellists and submitters for their efforts in getting us here. Thanks.
Councillor Vanders.
The Reserves and Beaches bylaw, I believe, is a bylaw too far. Councillor Hawkins has talked about protecting people and protecting people from themselves, and I think would have been one of the characters that Bob Jones was thinking about when he wrote the book The Permit. I don't know if any one of you read any of Bob Jones's books. They're all entertaining. The Permit is one which basically highlights exactly, I think, what this Reserves and Beaches bylaw seeks to do, and that is to restrict the use of the beaches by one group, by another. The fact that the committee has been totally focused on the submission process, and the fact that there were no four-wheel drive or other vehicular submissions against it, to me doesn't negate the existence of these users of the beaches, or quite often their appropriate use of the beaches, I believe. Similarly, a lot of horse owners, I think, will be somewhat dismayed at this new bylaw, although I am assured that I will get some information shortly that shows that horse access will still be similar, at least, to what was available before. Protecting people from themselves, I don't really see as the core purpose of local government. I think that we should, unless there is a real issue that is apparent, I think that we should be very careful about legislating, about requiring permits, and about having blanket bans on, for instance, motorised vehicles anywhere on any of our beaches. For these reasons, I will be voting against this particular bylaw.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Benson-Park.
Thank you, Worship. I think it was a very positive process, and just on the matter of the last point that the previous speaker raised, anyone who's read the submissions would be left in absolutely no doubt about the strength of feeling about irresponsible and conflicting use of vehicles on beaches. I don't know why people who want to drive their vehicles on beaches didn't turn up, but they didn't. And the weight of opinion in submission was absolutely incontrovertible. In general, I think on all the issues, I think the committee has reflected the submissions and the presentations that came to it very well. And I can confirm that, in fact, there's greater access for horse riders and equestrian users than was previously the case. The issues that appeared around access for the trotting trainers, for example, on 2 locations have been perfectly satisfactorily addressed as far as I'm aware, as have the issues that were raised, the concerns that were raised by the commercial operators of horse treks. It's interesting, actually, if you people read the submissions and they're available on that consult site that we use, you'd be quite surprised as I was at the breadth of the range of activities on our beaches. In terms of the issue raised earlier by Ms Tate, I think the sensible process was to take advice from the Department of Conservation in terms of the areas that we should label for a higher level of exclusion because of wildlife concerns, and I think that's been appropriate. Should others be identified, then we'll just have to pass them through the process. But I have absolutely no doubt that the outcome that is on the table today is a really good reflection of the submissions and the hearings that took place. I think ultimately the decision that I'm sure you'll support today avoids damage to the dunes, hence the importance of the accurate mapping of the designated entry points, and also the avoidance of those areas that are sensitive for other reasons. I think it also will have the desired result of significantly reducing conflict between different beach users, and that can only be a good thing.
Further speakers? Councillor Wiley, you right to reply? Don't watch out. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against?
No, recorded, please.
Recorded, Councillor Bendis. Thank you. Right. Sorry? Division. Oh, division. It's been called for. Jenny?
Aye.
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 Aye. No.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, councillors, we'll go on to item 18 on page 267, appointment of a representative on the Regional Transport Committee.
I'll move.
You've taken me by surprise and I'm behind the eight ball. Who moved and who seconded? Councillor Wilson and Councillor Hall. Is there any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
I just note that it's listed as item 19 on our paper. It's actually 18.
It's listed as item 18 on mine.
Yeah, but when you go to the hard copy.
267, there's a misprint.
It's just in the paper one.
All right, thank you for that. Clarifies it, so we all know what we're talking about, I hope.
I do.
This isn't a marriage ceremony.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite.
Right, if there's no discussion, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, on to the real item 19. Appointment of members to the District Licensing Committee, page 269. Yes, please.
Councillors have the report, but I just want to add that if you resolve to seek expressions of interest from the community, then those expressions of interest would come back to council for decision.
Right, so does everyone understand that the council gets the say, final say?
Yes.
Final say on appointments to this board. So questions for a start, Councillor Hawkins and then Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I understand that the term of appointment under the DLC is 5 years. Is there no scope for that to be, for us to choose to make it shorter than that, were we to want to?
Christie's nodding that yes, there is scope to make it shorter than that. Will you want to?
And this is no criticism of the nominee, but just with respect, just to, I just wonder in general whether it's prudent for us to make appointments of elected members that go beyond an electoral term, and whether it, and we've accommodated that in our previous council appointment has become a community representative. But I just wonder if any thought had been given to the council to align council's appointment to the DLC with the triennia.
Yes, so as the author of the report, I researched what the term of appointment has been for previous district licensing committees, and candidates have been appointed for the full term, so that is the background to the scope of the recommendation made here today. It is, of course, entirely up to council as to what term it wishes to appoint for. This role is not dependent on the person holding a position as an elected member, and should the status of the elected member change over the course of the triennium, the council could also reconsider at that time whether it wished to have that person appointed on that committee.
Councillor Wilson.
Just understanding the, when we do other appointments, we look at skill sets and diversity and a number of other matters. And I'm just wondering, in advertising these positions, given the relatively male white nature of the wonderful people who do this job, and not saying that's negative at all, but I'm just wondering how and whether we're going to continue to advertise in the same way we've done in the past to get the same we've got, or whether we may be looking at other means of getting equally qualified but maybe slightly more diverse picks on this committee.
We will be attempting to increase the diversity of the committee through advertising in as many different medium in different ways as we can.
Are there any further speakers? Yes, speakers. I think we're... it doesn't matter if we're...
it hasn't been moved.
Oh, this hasn't been moved, sorry. Moved Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Wilson. Of course, we'll take more questions if there are any, and if not, I'll invite speakers. Councillor Staines, you wish to...
Am I right? Just in case.
Any further speakers? Do you want to speak to what hasn't been said? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 20, Dunedin Hospital SOS update, page 271. I think this is for noting, isn't it? Yep, for noting. Great.
You vote?
Thank you. I'll note that. I'll just ask the questions first. Questions, Councillor Wow. Sorry, just before you do it, do you want to introduce this at all, Graham, or do you just want to go straight to Michelle?
No, we're happy to take any questions councillors might have.
Right, Councillor White.
What has the staff costs been? I know that there's a list of activities, but cost of staff time and...
We don't have staff time recording, so I don't have a figure for that.
Okay. And also, this is probably more directed towards the Mayor. Through this campaign, have you had invited Dr. Coleman or the Prime Minister to come and speak or engage with councillors over this campaign and come and meet us and hear what?
The resolution by council asked us to send a message to the government, to the Prime Minister. I have had a couple of conversations with the Prime Minister personally on this, but when I had the opportunity, but I haven't. We've followed, as far as I understand, we've followed the directions of the resolution in sending the messages to.
Okay. And is there an end time on this? And can you confirm that for me, please?
Just the end of June. We're expecting an answer from the group in early July, so we're aiming at this point for the end of June. And should that decision not be made, then obviously we will have to revisit that date.
So this campaign is going to keep going until the committee comes back with...
Well, at the moment, as I say, we're aiming to the 30th of June, so we'll look for further confirmation about what councillors want to do from that point.
Okay, and so the spending to date would be pretty much in line with between now and the end of June, or is it going to be ramped up?
No, it'll be similar. We've got a couple more videos to come and a couple more adverts, so yeah, in line with what's already there.
Okay, is there any sense of budget on this, or is it just we'll just spend what we spend?
No, there is a budget in that. Yeah.
There's not an identified budget, but given that this is a resolution of council, we're giving effect to it as best we can while being as prudent as we can with the money that was available.
Okay, but we've had no staff costing, and I'm trying to get an understanding of, how big a can of worms is this?
We've given as full of detail breakdown as we can of the costs that we know.
Okay, and you're saying we think we might finish on June 30th?
So, I mean, any spending, I mean, it's still within the CCM budget. There's no extra spending outside of my budget.
Okay.
I think the answer to your second question is that we'll finish when we get a positive result. Councillor Wilson, did you?
I think I'm not quite sure it's a question for you that you can answer, but it's as you campaign, are there issues that you're finding that you need to invest more data in? I mean, at the moment you've got a fairly limited motion, and I'm just wondering whether actually more is required in gathering information. I've heard an interesting story from a staff member recently about her own experience elsewhere about the importance of medical facilities being beside a university. And I'm just wondering whether there is more information that you think will help the campaign or assist the business case that is the government has to do this, and whether that's a question of you or for the CEO, I'm not quite sure.
We do various assessments of economic impact of things that go on, and they are ongoing. We could specifically look at the economic impact of having the city in the CBD, if that was of interest. Of having the hospital in the CBD of the city, if that was of interest. And that might be a useful piece of data to ask for one of our impact assessments to specifically include.
Councillor Elder.
I was actually just about to ask the same thing. If we had a very good, well-researched rationale about what the impacts on the economics of the, retail area, for example, the tertiary precinct, etc.
I'll draft up a resolution and you can decide whether you want us to proceed with that.
Councillor Vandevers.
Councillor Wilson has suggested that what we have here, and I'm assuming she's talking about page 271, is a fairly limited motion. I would have agreed if we were just talking about the fact that it doesn't mention a campaign or a leaflet drop, but I can't help feeling that, especially under 4A, that it's in fact a rather overreaching motion, and wonder if you see any conflict in the fact that it says that council communicates its complete opposition to a rebuild when 20% of councillors voted against it. Do you see any conflict between
point of order.
Complete opposition?
Point of order.
It's a breach of standing orders, Mr Chairman, to reflect on a motion that's been agreed previously by council, which is exactly the case in the comments that have been made.
But I'm upholding the point of order because process-wise, we've made a decision. Once a decision is made, it doesn't matter what the majority is, it's the decision of council. And the resolution was about the complete opposition of the resolution, from the resolution. So,
my question was to the staff.
Yes, I know, and I'm saying it's an inappropriate question because it breaches that standing order.
And the standing order, can you please quote it for me? It's not one that I know.
Well, Christy, can you leave assistance and I would point out that the word complete is the opposition expressed by a majority of council. That's it. No, that's not what the one he quoted.
Misrepresentation.
Good try, Wilson.
Councillor Richardson.
It's not just a standing orders reflecting on criticised decisions.
I think this is unlikely to be in standing orders. The issue is, it was a resolution, the wording is the wording of the previous resolution, and council voted by a majority to pass the previous resolution. You may have voted against it and you might not like it, but a majority of your council voted in favour of the resolution with that precise wording.
I completely agree with everything that you say, but would like to know what standing order has been upheld by the Mayor. Thank you.
So, just the point of order raises standing order 20.10, criticism of resolutions. A member speaking in a debate may not unduly criticise the validity of any resolution except by notice of motion to amend or revoke the resolution. In reflecting on that, I don't think I will reverse my judgment in that I don't think you criticised the resolution, but you question it. But I think the Chief Executive...
I just asked for an opinion, and thank you for that.
Yeah, but the Chief Executive has clarified the wording where it just says complete opposition. It is the original resolution.
Yes, I accept that.
And it is not, the word complete is not referring to all of the council. It is referring to the opposition of the majority that voted on it. And that becomes a council resolution.
I understand that completely, but thank you very much regarding the standing order.
Now, Councillor Garrett, sorry.
On a more positive note, I wanted to first of all congratulate staff for all the work and the comms team for this campaign. Working with them has been an absolute pleasure. And ask a question: have there been any lessons around community engagement? Because from what I've seen, it's been a very effective community engagement. I just wonder if there's any lessons learnt from that that will be useful for other parts of our council community engagement.
Well, it's basically a broad way of communicating with the community. I mean, we've looked at communicating on all channels. That was an important thing, and so we've done that. And we also monitor what we're getting in terms of response in the various areas. So it helps us to benefit from that. Yeah, and reacting to that as we go. Yeah, that's right. So it's a growing thing, and I think also it's important that that we think of both the electronic channel and the print channel, because they're both very important.
I think one of the things initially it was just electronic, but very quickly it became clear that that didn't necessarily meet the needs of all our community. So we did adapt this, and I think that's been the key thing we've learned, and we will reflect on that for other things where we're consulting, like around the LTP, for example, making sure that we have an iterative process around that consultation.
Thank you very much.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks very much. Actually, just making sure that we are being fiscally responsible here as we go forward, because we wouldn't want to be wasting any money. Just if the decision's coming out at the end of June, perhaps we would probably wait on any reports of economic impact until we know that it isn't going into the centre of town, because if it is, then they'd be moot reports. That's just my observation.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Worship. I wonder, Mr McKerricker or Ms Graham, could you make any comment for those who are not followers of the blog site or the submission site in terms of the content on it, about the level of support we've had from the region, in particular the southern and Invercargill focus, because that has certainly, in conversations on the street, that has certainly surprised and heartened me for its lack of parochialism. And I wonder if you could inform people about who has come on board and the nature of that support, please.
Certainly. We've had quite a lot of support from our Southland mayors. Tim Shadbolt came on board. He's very, very supportive. Gary Tong, Tracy Hicks, and Gore District Council. So all very supportive of having the hospital stay in its current site somewhere in the CBD, and quite strongly saying that they need it there for a whole lot of reasons, for accommodation, for access to infrastructure, cafes, all that kind of thing. So really, really strong support from them. And of course they've all written to the Prime Minister and given their support to the campaign.
Are there councillor statements?
Thank you, Worship. My question probably is with the Chief Executive. I think having an impact report would be good, but do we have any handle on how much that will cost us? The bearing for that is whether we do it before the decision is made or whether we use it as a defence afterwards.
Yeah, the question for that will be whether we've got a vehicle that we can fit this into in the short term in existing research that's planned, and John's just sent me a quick note saying we do have something ready to go where we could insert this, so it would be somewhat more cost effective than doing it as a standalone report.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Wah.
Again, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, whether it's Ms Graham or you, Your Worship. Going back over various articles since the ACC deal was announced back in beginning December, has the ACC made any comment or any thought, or has this, the group, the hospital group, which I understand is the part of DCC / university, Polytech, SDHB, the steering group, have any discussion come out of that about the SOS campaign and what's been going on?
You bring together two issues there. One is the SOS campaign and the other was the commentary following the announcement of the MOU with ACC. I'll let the CEO comment on any further, if there has been any further engagement with ACC. Or what I can report is that the head of the Southern Partnership Group, Andrew Blair, acknowledged that the contention that there had been an undertaking to reserve the Frederick Street car park for hospital rebuild was untrue, and that he didn't claim that either. That's the only commentary that's come back subsequent to that MOU, but I'll hand over to the Chief to see if there's any other engagement that we've had with ACC.
No, not since we put the report up to you, giving them a period where they could do due diligence. But just to remind you again that despite some public commentary to the contrary, we did not make a commitment to sell them the land. We made a commitment to give them a period of due diligence so that they could set up a primary health hub. We know that they want to, and we know that they have begun the process of increasing their Dunedin staffing levels, which we knew was imminent. So we're very pleased about that, and certainly pleased not to be losing 350 good jobs from the city, but actually seeing ACC grow their staffing here. So that's good. But we have not had any further update on that side. They have a due diligence period for themselves.
Councillor Benson-Poe.
On that matter, Mr Chairman, it might seem odd, but it is one of the constant things that we find in talking to people on the street, that there is a complete misconception that the city has sold, not just discussed, sold that Frederick Street site to ACC. So can I just, we tell people that's not the case, but so can I just ask the Chief Executive please to reconfirm what she just said? Doesn't have to be in such a long explanation. A few short words would be fine.
I confirm.
All right, are there any further questions? All right, Councillor Wilson, did you move?
I'm happy to move the amended motion that's now up there.
So the amended motion is that notes that first runs notes as in the recommendation, and then instruct the CEO to carry out an economic impact assessment of having a hospital closely located with the Otago University and CBD retail precinct. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to this in the first instance? Second, Councillor Staines.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. I'm only going to speak to this because I want to congratulate all of the councillors, but especially the two leading the charge on this campaign. I was cautious about it at the start. I think that having seen the information that's been coming out about it and the interest on the street, this is about Dunedin leading and being part of its role in the south of the south. And the problem with this not happening in the CBD, it waters down a whole lot of other things that we all know, and but we all know anecdotally, but I think the idea of having an analysis of that will give us some surety that this is what needs to happen. And the only other reason I want to speak to this is yesterday hearing from one of our staff members who's recently been in Melbourne, and how she had reflected on this project, hadn't thought much of it, and had thought much of it, had thought it was good, but hadn't thought about it until the experience she had in Melbourne Hospital, where they relied heavily on the university nearby, and how quickly and the quality of the services that they received because of that. And it's sometimes you have to get outside of your city to understand the importance of the things that you do have in it. And I just congratulate all of those that have worked so hard on this to date.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Vandervis.
There are two preconditions that would have actually made me happy to note this and to support the campaign. One of them would have been knowing that we are able to reuse the existing ward block. In that case, there would have been, I think, a reasonably strong argument for going there. But the other one would have been the Southern Partnership Group, headed by Andrew Blair, confirming that a high-rise type of hospital rebuild was the best kind of modern hospital to serve Dunedin. We haven't had confirmation that the ward block can be reused. In fact, there's quite a few reasons why it may not be. We also haven't had confirmation that a high-rise type of hospital, the kind that we currently have, is actually the best kind of modern hospital available. And a lot of the research that I've read suggests that your high-rise type hospital is in fact not the best kind of modern hospital anymore, and that something that's low-rise, much more spread out, something set in a park-like setting would be a much more appropriate type of hospital. Given that the Southern Partnership Group haven't yet finalised what type of hospital, what type of modern hospital is going to be best for Dunedin, I believe that it's been premature for us to have already spent $14,500 plus staff time and resources campaigning for something that we don't actually know is going to be the kind of hospital that we're going to get. If we have been campaigning for a hospital that ends up needing 10 hectares, then plainly we've been barking up the wrong tree, and it's grossly premature for us to have been doing this. What I would like, given that you can't change the past, is that we don't push any further, especially with the second part of this motion, until we hear from the Southern Partnership Group what is the best type of hospital for a modern hospital rebuild. If that type of hospital ends up being a high-rise and you can get it in the middle of the city, absolutely fine, no problem. I suspect, however, that isn't going to be the case, and especially with the second part of this motion, will be the reason that I'll be voting against.
Further speakers? Councillor White.
When this motion was voted on back in February, I supported it. Or I supported the SOS campaign back in February. What I supported back then is not what we've got now or what this has led into. And through the election campaign, I campaigned quite positively and hard, and I will continue to, on the fact of the importance of a full tertiary grade teaching hospital with full services. In fact, it was pleasant to see my YouTube videos did quite well considering what we've seen in the reach, because that one video of mine with 25 seconds got over 10,000 views. The part that I'm really struggling with this over and over again is that we're basically arguing, or some of you are out on the streets, getting people, the public, to engage and fill out the forms and everything else, where we haven't even had an official invite, as I understand it, to the Prime Minister or to the Minister of Health to come and meet with us. Nor has there been a delegation from Council to go and meet with them. I would have thought the first step of engagement to get something to work positively is to go and meet somebody in their office, to go and actually engage with them face to face for that to happen. The other part I'm struggling with is we have no end date. It seems like an open series of dollars. Let's go keep spending, let's spend. Even though it's not a lot of money, but there was no any financial consideration in the first place. So I struggle with that. The other fact being is, and I go to an article that was written in December straight after the ACC decision, and I quote, "But Mr Cole said the council could not wait for that to happen in relation to the hospital rebuild. The timeframes for absolute decisions on the rebuild, for instance, they're 2 years away to confirm things. The decision had to be made." And that was around the ACC side. You know what? Some of you continue doing what you're doing, great. But don't also bag the rest of us who aren't going to go out there and do it for being anti. We're all pro-hospital in this town. We also should be pro-hospital services because we don't want to see them downgrading services. It's not just the building, it's the people with the building, it's the community. But let's not fight and say we want the hospital in this one location.
Councillor, you're straying, the resolution's to note the update. You're straying off this and re-arguing the original resolution which you voted for.
And what I voted for and what it's turned out to be are two totally different things.
We could add a resolution to go to Wellington and talk to the Minister if that is what you would like as a next step.
I would have thought that was the first step.
Councillor, earlier in the meeting, I said that I had had 2 conversations with the Prime Minister on this subject. So I find it odd that you would have not remembered that and then said we should go and talk to the Prime Minister. I have.
Your Worship, we listen to a lot of people when they come and talk to us and we engage with them. The part that I look at is I have not seen anyone at this table have a formal meeting or seen any minutes of a formal meeting with that sort of presentation. You entertain a lot of people who want to come and bring their views and share their thoughts on what should happen. I would have thought that would have been the first process that should have taken place so we could get a fair inclination from the Prime Minister or the Minister of Health around what is trying to be done here. I struggle with the undertones that this has and, you know, so I will not be supporting it.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Rarely do you see someone running away from their voting record as quickly as this, but a remarkable achievement all the same. We've heard from Councillor van der Vis that we shouldn't be supporting either the campaign or this resolution because we don't know what the best form of modern hospital is and that potentially the best form of modern hospital might be something a little more low-rise and scenic, which is a view that I find hard to square with his opinion that we should be investigating building the hospital in an industrial zone next to an operating foundry out in South Dunedin.
With 50 acres to do exactly what I suggested.
Nothing says scenic. As someone who sat in a hospital bed for a week listening to jackhammers outside at Christchurch Hospital, I can tell you there's nothing peaceful or recuperative about that experience. But on a more positive note, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank our community here in Dunedin for their engagement with this for this campaign and for their ongoing support and for coming and giving their time to engage with not just this campaign but also their wider concerns around the provision of public health services in Dunedin and around the country. But also I'd like to thank visitors to our city who have shown plenty of support also for this and to our colleagues in local government around the wider Otago Southland region who have supported this cause, because they understand that the campaign for a top-flight teaching hospital in downtown Dunedin is essential not just for our city here, but for our wider region, due to things like access to accommodation, things like access to retail and hospitality that is provided to people from the wider Otago Southland region when they're visiting their loved ones in times of trial located here at Dunedin Hospital. They also appreciate the value of co-locating our hospital with the University of Otago's med school and the key role that that plays in reinforcing the calibre of public health services that we have here. We have unanimous support from mayors around the region and from the Invercargill City Council, I understand, and to be honest, I think it's a little bit embarrassing that we can have greater political support outside of this city for something that is so pivotal to the future of public health and public service provision in this city than we can muster around this table. So that's disappointing, but and sadly not entirely unexpected. But I commend the work that our communications staff have done with very limited resources in terms of funding an issue campaign like this. And thanks again to everyone who's signed on for this. And hopefully we won't have much longer to run on this when the sensible option of rebuilding and restoring our hospital in the CBD is made by those who have the power to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steedman.
Thank you, Worship. For me, I see approximately 3,000 people working in that hospital down there. I see that as vitally important to the retail sector down there. It's not just the people that work in the hospital, it's also the people that actually come to visit the hospital and need a breakaway from the hospital. Regardless, however, of the location where the hospital should be built or may be built in our own personal views, this is also a call to action to the central government to actually start getting this hospital built. We, as leaders of the city, have got to stand up to them and say, this is what our people want and this is what our people need. We hear too many stories about what is not happening down in the hospital, the leaks in the place, the staff affected, and that ultimately affects our people that are getting care there. So at the end of the day, this is about a call to action to central government to actually get something done rather than the cheap talk and not getting it done. So obviously I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I also will be supporting this motion, and mainly because my perception, misguided though it be, I think the central government has been punishing Dunedin for the last 9 years for being a Labour city. So that's the perspective I come to it at. And when we've been campaigning, and I haven't done that much, but we don't need to argue with people. We just say, would you like to sign a submission about the site of the hospital? And people most of the time go yes, because they understand the need to support the retail section, the need to support our young people at Polytech and the med school in terms of if we were to, take it out of the central city, then all the logistics in terms of young people getting hands-on medical training as nurses or as doctors or other health professionals, we already cheat our young people incredibly in terms of the student loan crap, excuse my language, but I just see this work as leaders, and it's our job to lead the city and to actually try and give some hope and not be passive, so that's why I'll be supporting this.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to commend Councillors Hawkins and Benson Pope. I'm very, very proud to support this campaign. It's called Leadership, and it's about representing our community. And that's indicated to us as we are on the street talking to people and handing out pamphlets, and the response that we've had so far. We've done it before with the neurosurgery. They said that they were going to shut that and we weren't going to have any of that. We marched down the street with 10,000 people and said, hang on a minute. And we're doing the same again. I think you're right, we have been left because we aren't quite the national stronghold that we may have been. And I think I'd much rather be accused of leadership than be a nodding dog in the backseat of life.
Thank you, Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I can support A, but I can't support B, so I don't know if you want to take them separately or...
Well, thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
I just wanted to let everybody know that I've circulated the Southern District Health Board Strategic Services Plan, which is prepared by the SAPRA group and is often referred to as the SAPRA report, so that we can act from an informed position when it comes to what the services models are planned to be. Notably, that if you are from a rural district, this services model actually implies that you will be returned back to your area of residence as soon as the generalist model can allow you to be discharged from this hospital, which would mean you will be going back to your rural single-storey or two-storey hospital with lovely bucolic grounds. And I think that the fact is that a hospital in a city is in the city, and if it is put out onto the periphery, it is then miles away from everybody. And while the patient might have a lovely view, the family who have to come and visit them, the staff that have to service that hospital, everybody else is put aside there. They basically have to deal with having to travel so far, so it makes no sense putting it anywhere else.
Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. I fully support these resolutions, and I'd also like to add my thanks to Councillor Benson Pope and Councillor Hawkins for the work they've done coordinating this lobbying. For me, this isn't directly a matter of which colour you are when you're supporting a political party. If it was a Labor government and this process was going on, it would be the same thing that we would be saying. This is fundamental to our city, and I think the resolution here to get that economic assessment done is actually a very important one. In my role as Chair of Economic Development, this city would have its heart torn out if the hospital was moved from the CBD or moved any significant distance away from our university. The best teaching hospitals in the world are adjacent to campuses. And we have that here. We have the opportunity to grow the strength of our medical school along with a new hospital, with new facilities. And for us as a city, I think it's essential that we get our voice heard, that is what we want.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
As I've listened to my colleagues speak today, I'm reminded of the trip from Central Otago with my seriously injured husband in a traumatic head injury, and reassuring my American parents-in-law that it would be okay because we have a medical school in our city and there would be a really well-qualified expert who would help. And I wasn't wrong. And so I think about that a lot as I campaign. National politics, central government politics have no part in this at all, although I appreciate the reasons why they're mentioned. And I'm particularly impressed by the community engagement around this campaign, and I'm very proud to be part of it. So I will have no difficulty whatsoever in supporting this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to exercise your right of reply? Councillor Benson-Pope, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Worship. Just briefly, to address a couple of matters that have been raised, there's been no discussion in the motion or in our campaign material about the configuration of the hospital. We too often have straw men put up for the purpose of being straw men around this debating table. It is not about that. It's about the level of service that's expected by this community, and it's about the council's decision that should be located somewhere in the central city. So the irrelevance of some of the objection is astonishing, really. I think the other matter that hasn't been canvassed so far is, as part of this debate, in any debate about health or any major issue, education or health in this country, there is always going to be a plethora of concerns, and I've always found the health debates extremely difficult because, well, we've all been to schools, we've all been to hospitals and doctors, so we're all experts, and people have very personal levels of focus about their interaction with the health system. I think I have to say that from the comment that's come back to us, that this isn't just a debate about the Dunedin Hospital. That's what we're talking about, what I'm talking about now. But it's quite apparent from the wider concern in the community and the feedback from people, and that's been a great part of what I've done so far, actually. But the feedback is overwhelmingly a concern about the lack of medical funding overall. So in that context, I'm not qualifying what I'm saying, but in the context of a generally underfunded health system, particularly in the south, we nonetheless have in this city the gold standard of international medical care. We have a top-flight teaching hospital adjacent to the med school, and physio, and nurse training, and the med library, and OT, you name it, it is all there. Why in God's name would anyone try to break those synergies? And it's not only about having good health care for the patients and their families, it's actually, and to put not too fine a point on it, it's actually about the very health of this city. There are 3,000 people or more working in that complex or those complexes. Why would you entertain any suggestion that 3,000 people would come out of the central city workforce? That's why the owners of Centre City New World love having us there. They want those people because they understand the convenience of buying the toothbrush or whatever it might be for the patients, for the visitors themselves, or whatever else. Kmart are happy to have us there because in Centre City, because they know people go and buy the undies when they run out when they're visiting people. So this is an issue about the fundamental dynamic in urban design terms of the city, and most common statement we get is that this campaign, what we are asking for is a complete no-brainer. No one should entertain the thought of removing that level of health care from its adjacent campus, which is its core and the centre of our city. I should just say that 4,500 currently messages have been sent, but each one of those is 6 messages. So we're sitting at about 27,000 messages to various bureaucrats and ministers. I think they understand the view of Dunedin people, and I must say that the amendment here adding the desire to carry out an economic assessment would be an extremely useful tool as part of this campaign.
Councillor Wilson.
2 issues, and I want to be positive, and I hope that Councillor Wiley doesn't take this the wrong way, but I'd like to congratulate on the basis of his campaign, which I think cost a lot more than this one, and the self-importance that he rates of himself standing for council as compared to the hospital in the centre of the city. With all respect, I think that you've done this exceedingly well and cheaply, so congratulations on that count. The second point is the business case, I've sat through a number of the indicative business cases that the government has to go through or works all their capital projects through. I know that they will benefit from having an economic impact assessment on the Dunedin city. It won't be a core that they will do, it's not part of their own business case, but if they've got that sitting alongside them, I'm absolutely sure that they will refer and reference it, but not something that they would go and seek and do themselves as part of that business case. So I'm very, very happy to support that, because I think that, again, will just reconfirm everything that Councillor Benson Pope has just told us, but put some science and some figures to it. So that's the reason for both of them. I think they're both necessary, and I would really encourage people to consider the value of a unanimous vote today, rather than considering. Actually, there's two things. One is we're sitting in a building that is on the site of the very first hospital. Downstairs, as you go towards the Civic Centre, you will see a plaque on the wall of this building that says this is the first site of the Dunedin Hospital. It has always been central. We need to keep it. It is exactly the bones of the city that we've had the first hospital, I think, and certainly the first university hospital in New Zealand. It's been part of us forever. We've got other people wanting it. Don't let it happen. Please unanimously vote for what has always been part of the city.
Right, now, as I indicated, I'm going to put these two parts of this resolution separately. So the first one is that we note, as on the order paper, that we note this report. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Division, please.
So that's Councillor.
Division, please.
We'll take a division and then we'll clarify.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Vaughan withdrawn. Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Fisto.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Steadman. Councillor Steadman.
Aye.
Councillor Taylor.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson. Aye. Mayor Carr.
Aye. Okay.
Motion carried 12-2.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we have a division on the second part of it too. Preempt the inevitable.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Fisto.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Steadman.
Aye.
Councillor Davis.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson. Aye. Mayor Carr.
Aye.
Motion carried 11-3.
Right, thank you for that. Now we'll go on to the last item on the public agenda, the Remuneration Authority consultation document. Sandy, I wonder if you could give us just a little introduction, particularly around the fact that the response to the consultation document is intended to be split into two parts, and we're doing only one part today, the short question or the early responses. And so I just want everyone to understand that we're not responding to the whole of the Remuneration Authority's consultation document, because some parts of it are going to be left for some months. They are way more complicated and far-reaching than some of the early stuff.
So,
So I could let them think you do.
so the Mayor has summarised that very well, but you'll see that the consultation document as provided by the authority has two substantive parts. This report deals with a response to part two, which are largely administrative matters that will feed into the likely determination that they will issue on 1 July. The more significant things that they're proposing form part of part three, and staff's intention is to consider those more fully, to liaise with community boards and then to work with councillors outside of the council meeting to come up with some views on that and then bring it back to council for debate and discussion before we submit. it may be that we have two cuts at it, it will just depend. I apologise, the time frame for the first part that we're considering today was very tight, but that we didn't control that time frame, so we got it to you as soon as we could with as much detail as we could. And so the proposal is that we look at what we've outlined here, and then subject to council approval, that the Mayor submits the Part 2 response on behalf of council, and then we'll schedule some additional work, maybe some research, and we might even look at liaising with our colleagues around the region to see how they're approaching some of these matters. But we certainly will need to engage with community boards as well.
Right, so insofar as we're basically dealing with the questions on pages 277 to 280, I'll invite questions first, and then we'll go into, if there's total agreement, that's fine, but there may be some discussion on one or two of the points. So let's start with questions. Councillor Gary.
From my experience of talking directly with the Remuneration Authority in my Community Board's exec role in the previous triennium, I'm noting a greater thoroughness, a greater understanding of what we do and how we work. But my question is it possible to convey the difficulty of, it's always been at short notice, and is it possible to convey the difficulty of that as part of the response?
I have already conveyed that difficulty administratively to the authority, but if that's the will of council, we can certainly include that in the sort of the introduction to the substantive response.
Any further questions? Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And without trying to appear self-serving, I have a question around an issue that is raised in the discussion document but isn't siphoned off into either the first round or second round of feedback that the Remuneration Authority is seeking, and that's around the options for childcare support as an expense of local elected members. Is it your understanding that that will be included? Will there be subsequent documentation to this to inform the second round of feedback? Or is it your understanding that they are, because they're saying that they are going to ask that question specifically, but they're not saying when? Do you have any further insights as to when that might be?
I've asked that question directly of the authority because I noticed that it wasn't something that was in either of those parts, and I don't have an answer as yet. But so my suggestion, if I might, would be that we either flag that it's missing in our response to Part 2 with a view to them adding it into Part 3, or we come up with a council position now in Part 2 and put it in anyway. But at this stage, I have raised it with them, but I don't have an answer. And I can't imagine, we don't have another council meeting that would enable it before the 19th of June deadline.
Councillor Vanders.
Just looking at the large number of recommendations in Part 1, I don't really see any particular problem with them. But I do see a general problem, and that is that this is a Remuneration Authority consultation document. And it should be consulting, I believe, with the people that are paying us, not with us that are being paid. How they go about that is their business, I believe. I think these decisions are basically for them to make, and I feel slightly embarrassed that they're sitting in front of us for us to make decisions about our own pay. Making decisions about our own pay is something which I don't think we should allow in any situation, whether it's council or whether it's our own companies or anything else. And therefore, I'd just like to note the awkwardness of us being consulted, although none of the recommendations in Part 1 I have any problem with at all. I do note that in Part 2 there is a typo on page 194. It's just a typo. It refers to paragraph 49, but it should be paragraph 48.
Is that in the Remuneration Authority document?
Yeah, that's in 294.
So we're not. No, we're not. Just So I take it that you're hoping that Ms Graham will agree with what you've just said so as to make it a question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Sorry, forgetting that we were in question time.
Got carried away, didn't we? Right. If that is questions, can I move on now to the recommendations? Now, I note that the recommendations, the first one is consider the proposed submission. So I guess I just need to ask, does anybody disagree with any of the proposed responses? Because if they do, we need to take them out separately and deal with them. So that's the first question. Does anybody disagree with the proposed responses? Well, that being the case, then we can change the recommendation to approve the proposed submission, because we'll Councillor Hawkins.
Well, I'm fully supportive of all the things that are in it, but I would also like to add the support of this council for the Remuneration Authority's consideration of childcare as a legitimate expense for elected members. Whether we want, and I'm agnostic as to whether we take a position now, but I would like at least it flagged up in this submission that we're supportive of that investigation.
Okay.
He said not having crafted anything to do that, which I can do, but...
So can I take it then that you would move the recommendation with the change of from consider to approve in A and add a C where we ask the Remuneration Authority to consider the issue of claiming childcare expenses?
As part of the, specifically as part of their second round that closes in December, or
yes.
Words to that effect.
Jenny, did you get that down sufficiently, or should Councillor Hawkins do a little more work on the wording?
I wanted to just delegate you the ability to craft and circulate once we...
Yes, but I'm not comfortable with not having a clear resolution that we know we're voting on.
That's fine. I'll take a moment though.
Yes, appreciate that.
May I come and help you with what I think?
Mind you, if you're as quick with this as you are with the speeches, then it won't take you long. So that's been effectively moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Gary? Okay. Would anyone like to speak to this? Councillor Gary.
So I remember my conversation with the person who put this forward to the Remuneration Authority, and I think if we're really serious about diversity in terms of elected members, and we know the importance of that, we've certainly talked about that a little bit recently, then this is going to be a really important consideration. I think with this new Remuneration Authority, this new look Remuneration Authority, this is the time to be considering it, so I certainly support it.
Thank you. Further speakers? All right, we'll just give Councillor Hawkins a couple of minutes and then we'll have something clear to vote on. Councillor Vanders.
Just
not one to leave a vacuum, Councillor.
No, absolutely. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so do I. Just in anticipation of the childcare motion, my feeling is that, not having quite seen it yet, my feeling is that we are all here as representatives, and that we are here essentially as self-employed people. We don't get any kind of superannuation. We don't get any of the other kind of benefits that you might get, childcare or whatever, if you were an employee. And because we are fundamentally self-employed, I can anticipate a wrinkle in trying to bring in the kind of benefits that you might expect as an employee, that is to say childcare, whatever. So I'm just wanting to know if there's anyone with perhaps a legal background that might be able to cast any light on whether it's appropriate for self-employed people to suggest that they be eligible for childcare or any other benefits?
I can comment from the point of view of some of the discussions that have been had at LGNZ level. My understanding is that the status as self-employed was something that came into play 15, 20 years ago, perhaps. This is what I've been told, so I can't quote from this. And at that time, elected members generally in LGNZ were asked, I think, probably through LGNZ, were asked what status they would prefer, and they said self-employed. As time has gone on, the disadvantages of that have become more obvious. For instance, we can't be part of KiwiSaver. And there are a number of other disadvantages, and increasingly we are more like employees than we are self-employed in our relationship with council and in our duties, etc. So what I do know is that the Remuneration Authority is aware of that. LGNZ is discussed it actually last Friday at the National Council meeting and didn't come to any position on it, but flagged that it is an issue. Now, they're not saying they'll come down in any particular place. What I'm assuring you is that right across the sector, there's an awareness that this is an issue that at least needs to be discussed and addressed.
Thank you very much for that background, and I concur that it all sounds very reasonable. If there is a suggestion that we are to become employees rather than self-employed, can I suggest that the Employment Contracts Act will create far more problems than the current situation?
But that's something that would have to be discussed. Back to Councillor Hawkins. Yes.
Yeah, just speaking to the amendment, lest I can be sidetracked into the problems caused by the Employment Contracts Act. This isn't taking a specific position on whether council supports or otherwise. All this is asking to do is resolve an anomaly in the consultation document that said the Remuneration Authority will be specifically consulting on this issue, but then didn't include as part of that process a pathway for that consultation. So all we're asking is to include as an amendment to our submission a clause C, which asks that they conduct their sector-wide consultation as they have proposed at the same time as they're considering the Part 3 matters that we will be drafting a submission on later in this calendar year. So I'm not asking for support for the cause yet. All I'm asking for is to have more certainty around when we get to have that conversation. Thanks.
Right, further speakers? All right. I am going to put it. Is everyone happy for me to put it in one hit?
You take the last bit separately, please.
You want to take the last bit separately? Okay. So I'll take all those in favour of A and B, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? That's carried. No abstentions? No, it's carried unanimously. All those in favour of C, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against?
No.
It's carried. Thank you. And now I will move from the chair that we go into non-public as per the order paper.